So far, we have done a lot of steps to grow our crop. We started with soil preparation, sowing, addition of manure and fertilizers, providing water, and finally protecting the crop. Farmers have to go through a lot of hard work to get their crops to this stage. Now, because of that reason, that final step of harvest where we reap the benefits of all this hard work is celebrated in a very big way all across India. You might have celebrated some of these festivals or would have at least heard about them. Some of these festivals are like Pongal, Baisakhi, Holi, and Bihu. So in this video, let's dive into that harvesting step. If you recall from our experience growing the tomato, when the tomatoes were nice, big and ripe, we just plucked them from the plant. That was okay for our tomato plant, but when it comes to a big large scale farm, farmers have to do a lot of different things. In particular, in this video, we will look at how wheat is harvested because it's one of the widely grown crops in India. If we are thinking about harvesting fruits or vegetable or some other type of crop, the steps will differ to some extent. So, before we go into how wheat is harvested, let's just look at a wheat plant in little more detail. So, a wheat plant consists of this long stem which is about 2 to 4 feet tall. On top of this stem is the head. This contains about 30 to 50 wheat kernels, and each of this kernel contains a husk or a chaff, which is an outer covering. Inside this is what is the wheat grain that we actually consume. So in the harvesting process, we will see how this grain is extracted and separated out from this rest of the plant. There are 3 steps involved in the process of harvesting wheat. The first step is to just cut the plant. In farms that are of fairly small size, farmers use this tool called as a sickle. So they use that and they go through the farm to cut the plant from the root. This works okay for a small farm, but when the farm size grows larger and larger, we can't do this manually. So there an equipment called harvester is used. This is nothing but a series of blades, and this equipment is then connected to a tractor. So as the tractor moves through the farm, it helps in cutting the plants and also collects them and stores it in a separate container. So once we have the plants cut, this next step is called as threshing. Threshing is the process of removing the grains from the outer covering husk. Now the idea behind this process is based on the fact that the husk is much weaker when compared to the grain. So applying that right amount of force can break the husk without damaging the grain inside. There are 3 different ways in which this application of force is done. So the first one is manual, where a bunch of wheat crops are collected and just beaten on the floor repeatedly. So they could be beaten on concrete or some wooden planks, and that process or the motion of beating exerts that right amount of force which helps in breaking of the husk. In other methods, the plant is just laid out on the ground and humans or animals walk on top of it, thereby also exerting the right amount of force. The final method is by using a machine. Now, this machine is called as a thresher. So it has mechanism inside which simulates the same beating process, thereby helping in removal of the husk. So at this point you might be wondering, oh, we have a separate machine for threshing and we have another for harvesting? Yes, people had that same question as well. So they created this combined machine which can do both these things, which is called as a combined harvester. So as it goes through the farm and the plants are cut and collected, in that process itself it also helps in threshing. So it exerts that force and helps in removing the grains from the husk. As you might have noticed so far, that we have removed the grain from the husk, but in all the methods, both husk and grain are still together in a big pile. So, the last step in harvesting is to separate the grains from the husk. And this step, where we separate the grain from the husk, is called as winnowing. So, this step is based on the fact that the husk is much lighter when compared to the grain. So, one method that is commonly used by farmers is to take this mixture and drop it from a fairly good height. So, when they do that and there is some sort of air current, either by wind or through some fan, the husk being lighter gets carried away much further when compared to the grain. So, as these fall down, the grains start getting collected right beneath, while the husk starts getting collected at a much farther distance. So, this works fine when there is a small amount of mixture to be separated, but when it starts becoming larger and larger, there is a machine called as winnowing machine, which works based on a similar principle to separate the grain from the husk. So, let us do a quick summary of what we have learned so far. So, we learned that there are 3 steps involved in harvesting wheat. The first one is to just cut the plant from the root. The second one, called threshing, is to remove the grain from the husk. The final one, called winnowing, is to separate the grain from this mixture.